So how can I realize this non-doership? How can I realize that there's no doer? Because it really feels like there is a doer in me. And this is a great question. For myself, it started happening very naturally and spontaneously at certain times. I would be giving a presentation or speaking to someone at work or doing a client meeting, and the words are coming out, and there's just the witnessing of the words. It was like I was just watching this body speak the words to someone else, and I would see that there's kind of this afterthought of wanting to kind of like, yeah, that was a good presentation, or something else happened. And I would notice how this activity, this afterthought, this activity of really like claiming or giving a pat on the shoulder for a good client meeting, or more of like a negative thing is feeling like disappointed that I said the wrong thing, or that there was a mistake made, maybe shame, maybe blame, maybe guilt, right? But these are the kind of the two activities, and this is really the activity of the ego, the me-go, right? The selfing, which is just this activity. There's no separate entity, but it's more of this activity. And it really oscillates between like the negative and the positive, right? So it will make you, it'll create the activity of blame and shame and guilt, right? Which are very like negative, or it will create more of a like the pride and the arrogance and the specialness, right? So it just oscillates. It's either, yeah, I get it. I killed that interview. I did such a good job, right? Or I sucked. Man, I said the wrong stuff. I'm never going to get that job, right? So you see like this, either the positive or the negative, but it's just an activity. When we believe to be the actual narration, that dialogue that we believe to be, that's actually just another thought. That's actually just another thought, because when we look for that separate self, where it's the I that you believe to be, we never find it. We never find it. It's like there's a small I, the ego, which you believe to be, the me, that little I, and then there's actually the universal I, the one I, right? So how can we realize this? Like I said, is that was becoming very apparent in my life when I was not almost like 10 years ago. Probably 10 years ago, it started happening where it was more and more obvious. And you can listen to people when they say, it really happens when you're really present. When you're really present, you see that there's no me that's present. That you're present when the me is not there, right? So you're present when the me is absent, right? When the narration and the dialogue and the whole story, the story of you is not present, well, then it just is. It's just presence. When the story is absent, then there's just presence. So I was seeing that, and those periods of time were really long. You started off when I was just exercising or running or whatever, and then they'd go for, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And I gravitated to a lot of like manual labor type of jobs, or just yard work and stuff like that I liked doing. That was kind of like I didn't have to talk to anybody, and it was just kind of like tranquil mind, and realizing that there's no story going on, there's no narrator, right? And then that got into doing yoga stretches, some breathing, some yoga stretches, and just like I just kind of call it relaxing. And there's no story going on. There's just peace. It was just peace. And then I would see how it would kind of come back up. This activity of being a me would come up when I'm in front of people, interacting with them. And then I started noticing, like I mentioned with the presenting in front of people or client meetings, that started happening even in the client meetings, that then it was just disappearing, and everything just felt like very much in flow. And I started noticing that me is out of the way. That when that me's there, then there's judgment, there's doubts, there's worry, there's anxiety, there's sadness, there's depression. And when that me's not there, there's none of that. And I started noticing gradually this shift, that it was just essentially just disappearing in more and more areas of life, you could say, to the point where it was, I mean, it's gone. It's gone now. But to the point where before enlightenment, it was next to nothing, essentially. It was very seldom this me was coming back. It was very obvious. Like I said, for most people, that me is very, because there's such a strong identification with thoughts, that me is it feels solid. It feels very solid. It feels like it's there in most people their entire lives. Their experience of this me it's always there. And then it basically starts dissolving. There's less and less of it. And when there's less and less of the me, then there's more of our true nature that's just shining through. The happiness, the love, the peace, and the freedom that you are is just shining through, because that me is not blocking it anymore. It's like it starts dissolving, or there's holes in the me. So more of it just seems to be shining through. And you start experiencing that you're simply not even in flow. You are the flow of life. It's not that you're in the flow state, because that would just mean that who's the you that's in the flow state? You just become, you're not becoming, you're just the flow of life. You're just the flow of life. And that's what people like, they say, I was just in the flow state. What were you thinking? How did you get into the flow state? They're like, I don't know. What were you thinking when you're in the flow state? They're like, nothing. And they're like, I was out of the flow state as soon as I said that I was in the flow state. Something reappears. So we see how this me is coming and going. And when that's so obvious, then it becomes self-evident of what you are, because you're watching something come and go. It's like being identified with this teacup. And I think that I'm this teacup for most of my life. And then I start seeing that it's coming out of, it's leaving, it's absent, and it's present. And then it's absent, and then it's present. Might stay a little while. And when I notice that when this teacup is here, I'm experiencing problems. There's an experience of problems. There's an experience of chatter. There's an experience of worry and fear and blame and shame and guilt and jealousy and all these different things. There's that type of experience when that's there. But I'm also noticing that it's not always there. So then there's an awareness that dawns that, well, if I'm aware that that's coming and going, then how can I be that? Now, what is aware that that's coming and going? Which then what you really are becomes self-evident. I must be this awareness that is always present, because I'm aware of everything else that is coming and going. Everything else seems to be changing. But this awareness is changeless. This awareness is always present. This appears to be an activity because it's moving. But the awareness is not an activity. The awareness is always still. This thing is noisy. Shows up, starts talking about problems, talking about the future, talking about fears, talking about what happened yesterday, talking about how someone did you wrong, talking about how this is unjust. This thing is noisy. But it's the silence that's aware of all that noise. It's the stillness that's aware of all that activity. And when this thing seems to be coming and going, and you're fully aware that it's coming and going, then you realize that this awareness that you are does not come and go. And this awareness is not personal. This awareness has no opinions or preferences. It has no age. It has no gender. It has no height. It has no race, ethnicity, culture, nationality, religion. It has none of that. It's none of that. Right? So that's when it becomes very evident that that's just an activity. This is just an activity. It's coming and going, and that's an activity it's speaking. But that's not actually doing anything. Hence the non-doership. There's no actual separate self there, because that's seen to be illusionary. An illusion is something that appears to be what it is not. This activity that's coming and going is appearing to be something that's actually solid, something that's fixed, something that's stable, something that doesn't change. And your entire life, you've always thought that you were this. You always thought that this doesn't change. You always thought that this is actually very stable. This me that I believe to be. But once I start looking at it as awareness, and I start looking, then I start seeing, well, it was small, it's big, it had this going on, it had that going on, it's changing, it wears different costumes, has a different self-image last year, new self-image this year, it's putting on a different identity this year, it's switching identities, it has this personality in front of that person, this other personality in front of that person. So this thing's always changing. This thing's coming and going. How can I be that? Because what I refer to myself as this sense of I, that I is not changing, that I has been present my entire life. Who you refer to yourself as, this I, when you say yourself has always been here now. If I ask you, where is yourself? You would say here. If I ask you, when is yourself? You would say now. So yourself is present. And realize that yourself has been present your entire life. Now realize that this awareness has also been present. That this awareness is also here now, present. And realize that your entire life, you have been aware of every experience throughout your entire life. And realize that you cannot experience anything if you are not aware. If it weren't for awareness, it would be impossible to experience anything. Then an experience only exists because you are aware. So we get mixed up. Myself gets mixed up as this thought, this self-image, this role, this identity, the story. And when you see very clearly, there's this separation that happens. Oh, I'm awareness. I'm not the cup. I'm not the teacup. I'm pure awareness. And then you simply rest as pure awareness, and you'll notice that that cup comes less and less because you're simply resting in yourself. You're not identified with something that you're not. I'm not that, so you're not interested in it. You're not interested in your story anymore. It's not me. It's not my. That's just an activity. That's just the activity of the mind doing its thing. And once you see that it's nothing but problems, that activity, that story is a story of problems, it's very easy to become very disinterested in it. Oh, that drama? No. Because you know what? What I am is pure peace. It's permanent peace that doesn't come and go. So why would I give up this peace to identify with that problem? No way. That sounds like insanity. I'm not doing that. So then there's no more identification. Well, at first, it's less and less identification, unless this is seen very clearly. But there's less and less identification. The attention is being withdrawn from that activity. And it's like when there's no attention given to this teacup, it's like it doesn't come back. It's kind of like ignoring someone. If you ignore someone, they stop bothering you. They only bother you because you're giving them attention. So when this is bothering you, it's because you're giving it attention. As soon as you attend to yourself as pure awareness, the happiness, the love, the peace, the freedom that you are, then you're attending yourself, which is the happiness, instead of what you're not, which is the suffering. You're attending yourself as the peace instead of the conflict of the mind. You're attending yourself the love instead of that separation, believing yourself to be a separate thought. You're attending yourself, which is totally free, instead of being identified as a thought, which seems to be in the prison of your mind. So there's a withdrawal from it. And as there's the withdrawal of the attention, that attention is no longer feeding this activity. It very much feels like this activity is being starved, and it comes and goes, but you notice that it's getting kind of slower to come back. You notice that it's here for shorter periods of time, and it's away, it's absent for a really long time. And it comes back just to kind of say hi. And it's coming back when you are identifying as it again. And you realize that it's only coming back in these situations around these people or in these circumstances, or when I'm feeling this. And when that's fully accepted and fully felt, and that attachment is released or let go, then it's free. Then it's free. Then you're free. So it's seeing that. It's seeing that. That's why it's called a realization, right? What was the video talking about? How do I realize this? Well, you realize it by realizing it. It's something that's happening. Meaning it's not new information. It's not new information. That dance coming and going is happening all the time. It's the fact that you're just not watching it. You're not aware of it. But then as soon as you become aware of it, you can't become unaware of it. That's the neat thing about awareness. Once you're aware, you can't become unaware. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right? Once you see that it's coming and going, first you thought it was something that there's actually some solid thing inside you called the me. And you look for it and you go, where the heck is this thing? Well, it's there sometimes, and it's there, and it's not there other times. Interesting. I always thought it was consistent. I always thought that me was consistent. You go, well, no, it's everything but consistent, actually. It's changing all the time. It's not there. And it is there, right? It's coming and going. So, but what is aware that it's coming and going? Is that consistent? Yes. Does that come and go? No. Does that change? No. Right? It's that. So then it's like a swap. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm not that. Okay, well, I'm this. I've realized what I am. I realize that I'm not that activity. I'm not that belief in being a separate doer. But this awareness is universal. This awareness has no boundaries, no borders. There's no separation. It's universal. Right? And it's that activity is arising out of the awareness. Right? So that's the best way. Practically in life, look for it for yourself when you see, and you kind of like notice these things when people say this. Like I said, in like when people are in that flow state, when they're very present, it's like because presence is pure humility, right? So it's this activity which is actually the pride, the arrogance. I'm creating the song. This is my song. But you notice that there's a lot of humble artists that are very creative, because all the creativity is arising out of the present moment. So the more present you are, you could say, the more that you are present, which means that you're not identified with the mind, then you'll notice that you're just naturally more creative. And artists will say things like, it's just flowing through me. Or they'll say like, it's God's creating this through me, or it seems like I'm not doing it. It's just flowing. And they're pointing at it. They haven't fully realized it. Most of them haven't fully realized in the non-doership, but at least they're noticing that they're feeling like in the studio or when I'm painting, they're noticing it as like, I'm free from the me. That's why it's like their happy place, because they're experiencing their true nature, which is the happiness. And when you're experiencing happiness, you're not experiencing a separate me at the exact same time. You're always only experiencing happiness. You're not experiencing this me experiencing happiness. There's not two. There's not the me and happiness. There's no such thing as happiness and me. It's happiness or me. And once that's seen clearly, then it's just too good to, why would you identify with the me that's all the problems? You realize that you are happiness. So they're kind of pointing at it. They're kind of pointing at it unknowingly, that they're kind of pointing that, yeah, I'm not the doer. It's like I'm not the doer in the studio, but then when I get home and try and control my wife and the kids and try and control everything else in my life, then I'm the doer. But in the studio, I just let it flow. So I'm not the doer in the studio, but in other situations, I am the doer. So like I said, it's not a full realization of non-doership. It's like you're partially open to the idea of some higher power that's moving through you in the studio. But then it's like, oh, but then you then take the controller and want to control the rest of your life. I'll let God control what happens in the studio, but at home with the wife and the kids, or at the office with the other colleagues, or whatever it is, I'm going to try and control that. Give me that controller back, right? How could that be? Who's the one that's controlling it? So it needs a full humility. It needs the full humility of, wow, I don't know who or what I am. And then you want to know who and what you are. And then you go looking, you seek, and you never find that me. Never. No one's ever found the me because it doesn't exist. But what you find is that you're everything. What you find is that you are the happiness, the love, the peace, the freedom that you actually were always seeking. You realize that you were actually seeking yourself in experiences and materials, objects. You're seeking yourself everywhere but here, now, because you're always present.